Amazingly, that was 3.5 years ago in November of 2017 with the Me Too protesters marching to Hollywood. And we will get back to that in a minute. But Carlos, how are you this week?
You know what? I'm doing reasonably well. I feel like spring is coming and more vaccinations. My hometown of Miami is in a little bit of tumult, but overall, I feel like I'm doing better than I was even a couple months ago. What about you? How are things in your world and your home?
Yeah, my hometown of my home is in a lot of tumult because my husband and my daughter both have COVID. So we are running a kind of quarantine setup here. They are both doing okay. My husband is exhausted. My daughter has lost her taste and is fed up at having to be stuck at home in isolation for 15 days. You know, I was feeling so optimistic. I did actually get my vaccine shot last week, but we were feeling a bit defeated about being so close to the finish line and then after a whole year getting hit by it. So we just need to get through the next week or two. It is a reminder that it is still out there.
Indeed.
But our subject for this week, those Me Too protests, let's get back to that.
Let's do that.
Hello, I'm Katty Kay in Washington.
And I'm Carlos Watson in California.
Welcome to When Katty Met Carlos,
a new show exploring what's shaping America today, brought to you by the BBC World Service and OZY Media.
It was back in 2006 that the phrase Me Too was first used on social media by the activist Tarana Burke, who had been a victim of rape and sexual assault. She wanted to raise awareness of how pervasive sexual assault and abuse are, and she wanted to empower, especially young and vulnerable women, to share their stories, giving them both empathy and support. But it was in 2017, with accusations against Harvey Weinstein, that the hashtag #MeToo went viral right around the world.
One of the first and most prominent figures to speak out against Harvey Weinstein was this woman.
I've been harassed. I've been maligned. And you know what? I'm just like you. Because what happened to me behind the scenes happens to all of us in this society, and that cannot stand, and it will not stand.
Rose McGowan is an actress. She accused Weinstein of raping her in 1997, shortly after she made the film Scream. Numerous other women also accused Weinstein of sexual assault and rape. He was arrested in 2018 and found guilty of rape by a New York court in February of last year. The powerful Hollywood producer and former head of Miramax was given a 23-year jail sentence.
But it's not just Hollywood. There have been recent allegations of sexual misconduct and abuse made against the singer Marilyn Manson. Also, a number of women have accused the mayor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, of sexual harassment. Both men have denied those accusations. In the UK too, the debate about sexual harassment and women's safety has been brought into sharp and dreadful focus by the murder of 33-year-old Sarah Everard earlier this month. So this week we are asking, where is the Me Too movement now? What has it achieved? And what needs to happen to make women safe? Rose McGowan, welcome to When Katty Met Carlos.
Thank you for having me, both of you.
Rose, before we get to the movement itself, and this is relevant, you're not in America. Tell us, without making us too jealous, where you are and why you're there.
I live in the Mexican Caribbean, and I live here because I could no longer tolerate the United States and its levels of toxicity. I grew up in Italy. I'm not from the US originally, and I just felt like I needed to heal, and I'd done my time there.
Will you come back to America?
Not if I can avoid it.
So let's look at the movement. And when we look at the killing of Sarah Everard, the accusations against Andrew Cuomo that are front page news at the moment here in the US, the accusations against Marilyn Manson, does it make you think nothing's changed, or have things changed?
Well, things have definitely changed, because I don't think anybody would really be covering the Andrew Cuomo allegations if things hadn't changed. My goal was a long time in coming, a long battle plan I had to set up. And I was the first to speak out. I was the first to go on tape with Ronan Farrow. NBC ultimately shelved that interview. Weinstein, for shelving it, he sent the NBC brass a bottle of Grey Goose each. So that's what we were worth. So things have changed. But I think fundamentally the press gets wrong and has consistently gotten wrong is that Me Too was a landslide of people sharing their pain. And what that means is that it's a communication tool. And the communication tools, did this happen to you? Me too. And this is what Tarana Burke did brilliantly. She created a shorthand for pain. But as far as a movement goes, women came after me, people came after me, but it felt like at times I was the movement, with very little outside help or none. And what we're seeing is Cuomo doing this stuff during the Me Too era. That's the craziest part to me. And, there's like levels of predation. So people are like, oh, Andrew Cuomo didn't rape anybody. He didn't do this. He didn't do that. But it just goes, if they're showing you themselves and who they are, what are they doing to their constituents? So it all ties together with abuse.
And Rose, talk to me about what turned. Why do you think the shorthand finally worked? Why do you think that someone like Harvey Weinstein, who could so brazenly, as you said, send Grey Goose to other TV executives, seemed to get away from it for so long? What finally turned in your mind?
What finally turned is Trump. I think Trump's Access Hollywood tapes, the famous grab him by the P word, that whole stuff, it kind of illustrated in a very black and white way for probably the good media people on the left. This in black and white is what sexual harassment and bullying and piggishness sounds like, and that's what they've been complaining about for all these years. Yes. It was kind of like, oh, that's what they're talking about. And for me to do what I did, I needed Trump as a foil. I don't think I could have done it without him. I certainly know if Hillary Clinton had won, we wouldn't be having this conversation. And I deeply believe Weinstein would still be out there raping.
And so talk about Governor Cuomo in New York as you see it. I am blown away that this number of people can come forward and yet he remains in office. Does that surprise you? Is that just a working of the system? How do you see that this number of people, including a current aide, could make charges to sitting U.S. senators and Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand could come out against him, and yet he still remains in office? What does that say to you about the potency, the power of the movement, or not?
I don't think it has anything to do with the potency or power of the movement. I think it has everything to do with business as usual in the Democratic Party. There's actually a Republican, I don't know if he's a senator or congressman, that just came out and actually took responsibility for his sexual harassment. I believe that was yesterday. And I was kind of gobsmacked, as they say in the UK. And it was nice to see that. Sometimes people just want an acknowledgement, an apology, and obviously a change in behavior. But the old tactics of smearing the victims, saying disgusting things about them in the press, getting all their cronies to do so, and the protection of powerful Democrats, I believe and really know, because if the Democrats go hard against Cuomo, what are they going to do about Biden and the allegations against him? And it sucks for a lot of people because, so many people have to deal with the fallout of these idiots and what they do.
Rose, I want to get to talk more about this notion of belief and retribution or justice in a minute. But I think to understand how you got to where you got to, it'd be really interesting to hear a bit more about your childhood and your background, because you were incredibly brave to speak out. You were born into a religious cult in Italy. I think your father was the head of the Italian chapter of that cult, and there was a certain amount of abuse associated with that cult. You ran away from it later on in the States. How much do you think your extraordinary upbringing prepared you for that moment when you had to take on power in a way that demanded a huge amount of courage?
That's a great question. Yes, I grew up in what they call a cult, a sect called Children of God. At its peak, it had 130 chapters. My father ran the Italian chapter. That's what I was born into. Now, the thing with this cult is it eventually did human traffic the young women in it, and eventually did, which is why we escaped, advocate child-adult sex. But I would put forth that there are many levels of cults in society that people are in without even realizing it. And people are like, oh, they human trafficked and raped children in your cult. And I think, well, they do that in your society too. So these were people from the traditional system that tried to buck the system, but fell victim to ego and power and deviant minds, really, at the end of the day. And we have an awful lot of those. I mean, people that want to lead tend to have, unfortunately, great sociopathic tendencies. What prepared me, my father said I was born with a fist up. And my book is called Brave, the one I wrote. And I was usually after him. You know, he would be sitting there in his kind of rattan throne chair with acolytes, young women, just staring up at him. And I remember very clearly being in the corner, just staring at him and shaking my head no. And he would catch sight of me and get a scowl on his face because I was always kind of Debbie Downer. I just, from a very young age, saw what power did, saw how they manipulated people's minds with it, saw how they terrorized people. I also saw, you know, it wasn't all bad where what I grew up in, the education system was, I think, far superior, certainly, than to the US is, what I experienced later. And it helped me very clearly see the US and its education system and its mores, its system of thought and behavior. And I could see the parallels so clearly to what I grew up in. And that's why I often call the USA a cult, one of the biggest ones. And Hollywood specifically is the cult's, you know, propaganda leader. And Harvey Weinstein was the head of that cult. And the thing is, for me, I've just always fought the system. If there's a harder way to do it, I will figure that out. I don't know why. It annoys even me. My sister Daisy used to always say, Rose, why don't you just say yes? When they would sit on the end of my mat and say, have you let God into your heart today? And I would say no, and I would take the hit. And it wasn't, as I realized at a young age, that I didn't believe in God. I just didn't believe in theirs. And I couldn't justify lying about my beliefs just to make their illusion feel better in that moment. I couldn't do it, and I'd never been able to. And in Hollywood, for many years, I was discovered, and I had to just shove it down until I knew it was time to go for it, you know.
Rose, once you did decide to come forward and say something, but besides Trump, what else helped you make that decision and have an impact? And I'm saying it not just as we think about your experience, but I'm looking forward to other young people who may be brave enough one day to challenge something. And I want to try and make sure that they have some insight about what you went through and what you learned about how to make change.
The journey is a really hard one, and you have to be prepared for when you mess with power and when you push at it, it pushes back hard. So you have to be prepared to give everything, depending on what your situation is. But as far as activism goes, and as far as fighting the power, what I can say is this: you have to be okay with being hated. You have to be okay with that, because you will be. And you have to be okay with using and taking righteous anger. That was, for me, the number one thing that motivated me, was righteous anger, a la a Malcolm X, you know, a la like anybody that really fights the power in an unusual way that makes people uncomfortable. I think the best advice I can give is that however old you are when you decide to fight back and fight systemic wrongs or personal wrongs, that anybody with more power will come for you. But you can survive it. And you have to be very crafty. You know, you have to think laterally. You have to think in every way you can. And it is a battle. And you have to think strategically and use everything in your arsenal. For me, I feel like I gamed the system. You know, I knew I was discovered for acting and really quickly realized I was on the wrong side of the screen and that I couldn't get out and that I was trapped. And then after that, I was in the middle of my second film for Weinstein when I was raped, and I immediately spoke out, and my then managers hired a fake criminal attorney to come speak to me. It turned out it was an actress. And she said, "You're an actress, you've done a sex scene, you're done," to shut me down. But I knew even then, back in the day, that it wouldn't work. So you have to also understand timing. You have to understand also how to get access to the system. I did it in a very unusual way that I don't know would work for most people, but I I realized if I did essentially undercover work for long enough, just kept my nose to the grindstone and try to survive and gain access to cameras and microphones worldwide, that at some point I would be unstoppable.
So you're saying you thought all along that you were going to make this move, and in your mind you were incubating that and working on that for a number of years before you finally did the Ronan Farrow interview?
Absolutely. And even before the Ronan Farrow interview, it was, I think, 2015, maybe, that I tweeted about an Adam Sandler, a sexist casting note that I got. And that was kind of like the opening salvo, like, I'm coming. But this is a long, long, long battle plan. And I studied when I was little. I would put, maps of Napoleon, Genghis Khan, and Alexander the Great's battle plans on my wall with like Venn diagrams and just kind of a nerd. And I would read a lot on military strategy and tacticians, and kind of adopted some of their kind of willingness to go to battle and willingness to think strategically and willingness to, I believe in a really strong offense. Playing defense is very difficult. But if you have a strong offense and you come out guns blazing, and you also behave, as I did, as someone who's not really been seen in the public before, certainly not a woman, taking that white hot anger, which many women have bred out of them and are very scared of. And I just say, it's not all the time. Sometimes righteous anger, it's like a thunderstorm. It passes by and you have to let it out. And the way I did it was just honing it into this white hot heat. And I did a show called Charmed for a couple of reasons. And it was a big hit TV show when I joined. One, because Weinstein blacklisted me in film, so there was no job there. Two, I realized by joining a hit show, and I studied where it was popular, its Q ratings all over the world, that if I did it and kept it successful, that I would then have enough of a profile that when it came time to strike, it would hit. And it did.
Rose, you've touched on the idea of people pleasing. I don't think you've actually used that phrase, but you've described yourself as a younger woman and as a teenager as somebody who wasn't interested in pleasing people. When you look at the way young girls are raised in America, but in other countries too, it seems that we are kind of grooming them to please people, to be, this awful phrase, good girls. And I wonder how much we can shake that, because I think there is a direct line between encouraging our teenage girls to please people and be good girls, and then setting them up to be abused and not speaking out about it.
Absolutely. It's not just when they're teenagers, though, girls, and it's not just girls. We have to start looking at our children and stop putting them in boxes. Like with boys, here's your emotional straitjacket, have fun getting out of that for the rest of your life. Meanwhile, they get molested and abused too. Now they have no way to articulate it. But with girls, and I directed a movie called Dawn, and its subtext is completely about how we send girls out into the world with politeness as their only defense. And so what happens when you meet a monster? You're trained to be polite. Now go sit on your uncle's lap. No, you don't want to give him a kiss? Give him a kiss. That's what needs to stop. And that's grooming of your own children and societal grooming of children, whether they be boys or girls. And that happens from a very young age. That needs to be really reconsidered and looked at. We need to use different language. We need to not force them to sit on people's laps when they don't want to.
Yeah. One of the most heartbreaking things we hear time and again from people who have been raped or have been abused is they say they feel guilty. Did you ever feel that sense of guilt, or did everything that you had come from in your childhood free you of that guilt?
I did not have guilt because and this is really perverse and messed up, but I was lucky. I wasn't on a date. I was not having a drink with this person. I was not attracted to this person. I was in the middle of my second film for this person. It was a 10 a.m. breakfast meeting set up by my then manager. This was so clear cut that I didn't have guilt to unpack. I had self-recrimination because in my case, there was kind of a horrifying element. There was an MTV camera crew following me that day at Sundance where I was, and it was Rose McGowan, A Day in the Life. And I turned to that camera before I walked in to the Stein Erikson Lodge, and I smiled and I shrugged and I said, I think my life is finally getting easier. So I didn't have guilt, but I had for years this rage, like kind of anger at myself for like, damn it, you jinxed yourself, which, so many others have to unpack so much more. And it's not so clear cut. I think there's a lot more latitude for people to abuse themselves on top of the abuse they've received. And for me, like I said, it was just very clear cut. I had rage from the beginning, but I had to shove it down.
Rose, what has helped you, I don't want to say deal with that rage, but what has helped you not only channel that rage into change, but maybe bring about a certain level of peace for yourself? And again, I don't feel like I've got the perfect word usage here, but I do hear you both speaking of this rage as helpful in making important change, but I also assume you're saying there's a personal cost. So tell me a little bit more about you and that rage and where you've taken it and what, if anything, has helped you adjust.
Well, first of all, let me say that I don't think women especially should be scared of being angry. It's bred out of us if we're ever even allowed to feel it as an emotion. And certainly like the trope of like the angry Black woman, they do everything they can to stifle that emotion. But if you look at it like we're here to live a big emotional life and feel and be every emotion in our arsenal, that's one of them. And people are so scared when they hear rage or anger that, oh my God, it's going to affect me. Well, I hope it does, because you can utilize it in a very specific way if you channel it correctly. If it's not just rage to your fellow man randomly. I was not someone who's going around raging, belittling people, abusing people, making them feel small. I channeled mine and I honed it to its white laser heat. And I used it very strategically. And I don't think if I'd grown up in your traditional society or most, it didn't get bred out of me. I had rage when I was little. I was usually mad, and I was usually mad at my dad. I just say, don't be scared of it. Not the kind of anger where you're abusing anybody else or you're terrifying anybody else, but one where it's okay to scare people if it's for the greater good, I think. I had so much of it that I had to store up for so many years. Like I would just have to eat it. I would go to an event in Hollywood and the actresses would move away from me because I had something called blacklisting that they didn't want to catch. Or I'd be at a dinner with CAA, Creative Artists Agency people randomly at some dinner, and one of them would lean over, and this happened to me numerous times. Get any good Weinstein scripts lately? This is all before any of the news ever came out. So it was like everybody knew, but everybody was in on it. And they shunned me while adulating him. And the thing of it is like that hones anger, like for sure. And I would just shove it down until the day I didn't have to anymore, until it was time. But I really believe that it's okay to have righteous anger. That's what changes society. That's what moves mountains. The softer, gentler way of women complaining about this stuff for years wasn't working. I mean, clearly.
I think that guilt that I mentioned that you hear so often from women who have been victims of rape, particularly often in war zones, is often anger sublimated, right? In a way, your anger is a far healthier response, clearly, to what happened to you than guilt. It's just that is what so many women are left with. In 2017, when you went public and Time magazine referred to you as one of the silence breakers, the hope back then would be that it would be much easier for women to speak out, that it wouldn't be as terrifying for them to do so, not just for somebody like yourself who had a profile and a microphone and a camera that she could speak to about this, but for women in the restaurant industry, in the healthcare industry, women who didn't have access to that microphone. Do you think that's happened? Do you think in the intervening 4 years it has become easier for women who don't have a platform to talk out about their accusers and come public with them?
That's a very good question. And I think yes, by about 20%. And I think that's a huge gain if you look at it in that short-term period. I also want to make the case that, side note, that I would say the messages I get on Instagram and Twitter and I was receiving like volume for years of just people's pain and outpouring of pain. Something that shocked me is I would say it was about 55% men and boys reaching out to me, gay and straight. So we talk about women a lot, but it's not just women. And the men have to sit and listen to that, kind of suffer in silence and not feel related to. And I would say that they channel traditionally are allowed to feel rage and anger, and they channel it that way, whereas women have to sublimate it, like you said, and are only left with guilt, shame, and pain. And it's okay to want to blow up a system that hurt you, whomever you are. Now, I mean, it went horribly for me, don't get me wrong, like on all sides, liberal and conservative came for me in really egregious ways. But
did you feel threatened?
Well, I felt threatened because Weinstein and his very powerful lawyer, David Boyce, went to Prime Minister Ehud Barak of Israel and recommended a company called Black Cube and 2 other intelligence agencies. And I felt threatened because I knew there were people shadowing me. There were listening devices put in my house. They stole the headlights out of my car and put in a tracking device in there. I was shadowed. I was terrorized. So yes, very much so. But by the public, it was more just kind of gleeful misogyny, I would say. And I have to be really honest with you, I experienced it more from the left and still do.
And Rose, what do those on the left say to you now about that? Have you had follow-up conversations with some of the same folks who you're saying were either not helpful or actively unhelpful to you?
Well, there would be far too many for me to isolate who those people were. But I will say, it's strange. I get a lot of messages from people on the that identify as being on the right in the USA saying, I don't agree with your politics, whatever those are. But I respect you for speaking out, no matter who the perpetrator is, whether it's Donald Trump or allegedly Joe Biden, right? But on the left, I don't get that. I do not get, they just get like, you're talking about Joe Biden, burn in hell, And I've noticed that the right, it's like really a lot more willing to just say, okay, we have differences in beliefs, like pro-abortion, anti-abortion, whatever it is, but I respect you. And thank you for making it a bit easier, hopefully, for my daughters and sons, which is really the appropriate response, because I didn't do it just for me. This was not, I made $15,000 last year. That's almost under the poverty level in the US. This is not a job that pays. And I gave up everything. But the thing on the left that I get is so much intolerance and so much hate and so much unwillingness to look at their own house.
I want to ask you about boys and men, because you said that more than half of the messages that you get have come from boys and men sharing their pain. Would you give us just a little bit more on that? And hearing that and seeing that, what do you recommend we do? What do you think should be part of the conversation or part of the change going forward?
Great question, Carlos. The thing is, I think even down to the Me Too icon thing that was shown on emoji on Twitter, it's pink. What? To me, that is so exclusionary. And it's everybody. The amount of hurt and devastation in young boys and men that have then no way to process this. So, people say, or men say, okay, women are lucky they get to talk about their emotions. Well, we talk about it, but then we're labeled crazy and don't believe that bitch. So we don't get very far, but we can talk about it, right? And then they gaslight you, they trick your mind. Whereas boys just have to shove it down. And I believe it's kind of like the little Dutch boy, trying to plug all the holes in the dam with the water popping through, and this rage comes out. And when I talk to a lot of them, these are the stories that they write to me these are harrowing, brutal situations. And the thing is like many, it's happened more than once. There's just usually the one really big one, but then there's a bunch of other bad things that happen in there. And what we need to look at is basically looking at society. And, pedophile porn online is huge. It's in all levels of society. And that kind of thing twists people's minds and makes it even more okay. It's something that's it's egregious. I don't know how to root it out in someone's home when you can't see it. But I do believe that if people stopped, telling their boys to be strong little boys and to shove any pain down, is it uncomfortable to hear someone in your family say they've been molested by Uncle Johnny? Is it unfortunate? Is it disruptive? Yes, all of the above. So what? Protect your child. And if it's you doing it, seek help immediately and put your child in a place of help. The thing is like, then they grow up to be men, these boys. And then they grow up with a rage that cannot be cured. And then we see the dangerous events that happen. And, the term toxic masculinity is thrown around a lot, but it is toxic, that part of it. But so is toxic femininity. And that plays a part in it too, because a lot of times mothers, they let a new guy into the house and, after a divorce or the man lets a new woman into the house and, the children are fair game. And people need to look at what are the intentions with these people trying to come around my children. It's a tough situation.
Yeah, I think it demands a lot more comfort with being uncomfortable and having conversations with our children and our partners and the women and the men around us that are uncomfortable. It's still a taboo subject. And while it remains a taboo subject, dark things happen in secrecy. And that is clearly what is still going on. For you, Rose, what does the next few years look like, apart from your lovely Mexican hideaway, which Carlos and I are booking tickets to come and visit so we could do this in person with you. What helps you recover from what I imagine is, you must have PTSD from what you went through with Harvey Weinstein, but then also what you went through with Hollywood afterwards. What helps you? What's going to get you through it? And what do you want to be doing for the next few years?
I have a therapy dog named Pearl, but here they call her Perlita, little Pearl, and she helps take away my nightmares. She actually sleeps on top of my head, kind of like a little furry crown. And this breed was it's called a Havanese, and they're said to really help with that. That, and I'm sure having, your gigantic rapist and power predator be put in jail is a huge boon to one's PTSD not being so intense. But for years, I had just exhausting nightmares 3 times a night, kind of like, war veterans, where you sweat through the bed, where you wake up screaming, and this was every night, at least 3 times a night, and until this last year. So what the next few years look like for me, one, I have an album that I made called Planet 9. I made it at the same time I wrote my book, Brave. I was doing EMDR therapy and binaural beat therapy. EMDR is when you follow a dot, kind of across the wall while processing the whole scenario of something that happened to you that's traumatizing. And binaural beat, same thing, but just with beep, 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 left, right sound. So I thought, what if I can layer in binaural beats into dope music that's not just kind of cheesy wellness music?
I know the truth. I know they lie.
And I'm opening and working on I guess you could call it a wellness center for the mind and for relief and to move things. And so what I'm going to be working on is more of my artwork and living a full life. I didn't get that. I got robbed of many, many, many years. And I always knew it was them and not me. And that's something I want to impart to the people listening. You have to know in your heart, deep in your belief system, when you suspect people like, maybe it's just me and I'm crazy. No, it's not. You're not. It is them. It is society gaslighting you. And what you suspect is true, but you're too scared to say it, actually is true. They do all these horrible things to people that speak out, and they do go after you, but it doesn't mean it can't be done. You just have to be willing to take the hits. And I'm here to say that you can live past it and live a beautiful, free life. Because if you're tortured by something that somebody did to you, and you see them, say, getting Oscars all the time, it can be done. It's just gonna take a lot out of you. But the freedom on the other side, it's priceless.
If you've been abused, it is them, it is not you. Rose, thank you very much for your for your candor and your honesty and your bravery, and give Pearl a treat for us, an extra treat.
I sure will.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you, Rose.
Thank you. Bye.
You know it's fear. You know it's try. You know it's tears. You know it's rain.
Wow, that was incredibly powerful.
Yes. We're glad to have brought you this edition of When Katty Met Carlos, a co-production from the BBC World Service
and OZY Media. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please leave us a review, tell a friend, and don't forget to subscribe. Thank you, and we'll be back soon.